So when I was 7 years old, I was in for my routine checkup with my family doctor, and he heard a murmur in my heart, which is instead of the regular rhythm, he thought he heard something a bit unusual. And he said I had to go for extra testing. So after that, I went for a whole series of tests, which ended up with a thing like an ultrasound, where they could take a look at my heart and they could see what was going on, and sure enough, there was something wrong. So the next test I had was about 2 weeks later, and they sent me into the hospital, and they put a little camera in my right arm, and they shoved it up through my veins, and it went into my heart, and it was filming the whole time, and it looked around until it found the problem. And the problem is what's called a coarctated aorta, where the aorta, as it came out of my heart, got very, very narrow for a half inch or an inch or something like that. So once they'd found that, they knew that's what was causing the murmur, and they were able to pull the camera back out again. But the interesting thing was, for that investigative thing, I had to stay awake. That sort of pre-surgery investigation ended up with the camera finding out what the problem was. So then they knew what had to happen, and about 2 weeks after that, they scheduled the surgery, and the real surgery was a lot scarier. So that time I had to go into the hospital the night before and get into a gown. I was in a ward with a bunch of other really sick kids. In fact, the kid beside me, I don't think he made it. He was in an oxygen tent. So it was for kids with really serious heart problems, this ward of the Children's Hospital in Toronto. So I went in there, and I got sort of all ready. And then the next day it was time for the surgery. My mom and dad and my brother came to the hospital, and they sort of told me to get ready. And that's when it was really pretty scary, because I remember saying goodbye to them. And I was in surgery for 5 hours. And during that time, they actually had to stop my heart, and they stopped me breathing. So I was on what's called a heart-lung machine. And to get in there, they had to cut a big thing from my left armpit all the way up to my rear, like my shoulder blade. And they pulled the skin back, and they took 2 ribs out. And that's how they got in to get to my heart. And of course, doing so cut all the muscles in my back and in my arms and everything. 5 hours later, I was taken back, and I was put into intensive care. And it took me a couple of days in intensive care before I could do anything. And I went into a physio program to try and get use of my muscles and rebind everything. But it took a long time for me to get better. But if I hadn't had the surgery, I wouldn't be sitting here right now. So if you're wondering if it's affected my life today and whether it changes how I parent, the answer is yeah, it does. I mean, it was a thing that I realized I got a second chance in life. Anyways, what it did affect, I think, is certainly when our kids were born, Gigi and Michael, we had them checked out, and I guess it also just affects your outlook on life, and makes you pretty thankful for every day that you have above the grave. So the last thing I wanted to add was that it also affected me when I was a teenager, and then when I was in college, and always made me very respectful and careful about things like driving, or friends of mine who would drink or drive or try drugs or anything like that. I was always just thankful that I had the extra lease on life from getting that surgery and getting all fixed up the way I did. So people should always remember that.